Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to The Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vanini, your host, as always, joined by TheOnlyColors.com managing editor Joe Toohey. Apologies for being off last week, but I had a whole busy bit of work with a bunch of coaches retiring, getting fired. And Joe, you had a birthday. How was your birthday?
It was pretty good. I managed to avoid a quarter-life crisis, so that's good, I suppose. But
all right, sounds good. So we're recording this Tuesday night right after the college football playoff rankings come out. We're going to start with that. We'll talk about the ranking, how things can play out, and we'll get in. We'll briefly talk about the Indiana game from 2 weeks ago, and then look at Nebraska this weekend, and finish with a little bit of basketball. But to start off, Spartan football comes in at number 7 in the college football playoff rankings, behind Clemson, LSU, Ohio State, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Baylor. Joe, your initial reaction when you saw the Spartans at number 7?
So, yeah, I mean, my initial reaction was disappointment. I sort of understand why the committee puts a couple one-loss teams ahead of some undefeated teams, and I think Alabama sort of gets some benefit of the doubt just because they are Alabama. But what's surprising to me, and I said as much on Twitter, but the really interesting thing is that the committee seems like they have been sort of championing this idea of strength of schedule. And this initial ranking put Baylor ahead of MSU. And to me, that just signals that they're a little bit more interested in blowout wins against bad opponents than in close wins against quality opponents, right? I mean, Baylor's best win's probably against West Virginia. MSU's best win is definitely against Michigan, but they also played Oregon in the non-conference, whereas Baylor's non-conference was really cupcakey. I mean, worse opponents than Air Force and Western and Central, for instance. So that was my initial reaction, was just sort of surprised that MSU didn't finish a little higher, just given the emphasis that it seems like the committee is placing on strength of schedule.
Yeah, it's always a little weird when they decide, when the chairman, Jeff Long, explains these decisions afterward, because he basically, from what I read, he admitted that Iowa had more impressive wins than Baylor and TCU, but TCU and Baylor had explosive offenses, which that seems completely contradictory as the whole point of the playoff, is that you're going based on a resume, and Iowa has a pretty good resume. More surprising than Baylor at number 6 to me was TCU at number 8 behind MSU, because I think TCU and Baylor are pretty much the same, except for TCU got a road win over Minnesota in the non-conference schedule. I mean, it was an ugly game, but they still went on the road and won somewhere, while Baylor played, Lamar and SMU, and I forgot who the other one was in their non-conference schedule. So my first thought when I saw MSU at number 7 was, that's probably about right. They've got their wins. They've got 5 wins over winning FBS teams. And it comes back to what I said during the non-conference schedule for MSU, is that these wins are going to look a little bit better as the year goes on, because Central's going to win some games. They're now 4-1 in the MAC. Air Force is going to win some games there. I don't quite know what they are. Western is near the top of the MAC, and Oregon has sort of righted the ship a little bit now that Vernon Adams is back. So you've got a bunch of teams with winning records, though. So MSU looks good there. On the other hand, struggled to beat Air Force, you struggled to beat Central, you struggled to beat West, to hold on against Western, you struggled to beat Purdue, you struggled to beat Rutgers, and you needed pretty much a miracle to beat Michigan. So you can understand why people might be hesitant to put MSU a bit higher. But the Big Ten and the Big 12 have the same situation, where their schedules for their top teams are backloaded. I mean, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, TCU, Baylor, none of them have played each other yet. We're going to get all of that in November. So there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff happening there. The Big Ten, Michigan State, Ohio State haven't played each other. Iowa doesn't play any of them. Michigan still needs to play Ohio State. You're going to get all that in the month of November. So this is going to be – it's obviously going to change a whole lot. the first ranking system was basically just for the sake of debate. And when you see a team like Ohio State, who basically has the same resume as MSU, you see them 3-7. You see Alabama with the same basically resume as Stanford. Alabama's 4, Stanford's 11. Florida at 10, too, with a similar deal. It just seemed like some of the brand names got some of the benefit of the doubt there in terms of Ohio State and Alabama. Frankly, I think Notre Dame should be in the top 4, but I know a lot of people didn't agree with that. But first week, it's kind of just meant to create debate. But when the chairman's admitting that Iowa has more impressive wins, but is behind TCU and Baylor, that kind of raised my eyebrows.
Yeah, so you're definitely right in thinking that some of the brand names got a little bit of a boost, I think. You look at Ohio State's resume, right? I mean, they beat Virginia Tech in the non-conference, but overall, who have they beaten, right?
Yeah, if they were the defending national champions, they're not sitting at number 3 either.
Right, and if they're not Ohio State, I mean, even just the name, right? Regardless of whether or not that they were defending national champions, I think that the fact that they are Ohio State is sort of what helps put them where they're at. In fact, so what's really interesting is just in the last hour or so, 538, which is the website that Nate Silver is sort of the star for, came out with their projections for the playoff, and they recognize in their projections even that certain teams get a little bit of a boost in ways that other teams might not, like in Alabama, like in Ohio State. So it's pretty interesting to sort of see how those things are distorting, because it's really hard to take that name away and not, have it shape the narrative to some extent with the team.
Sorry. On that note, I mean, look at last year. Ohio State got in over TCU and Baylor. If they were not named Ohio State, if TCU had Ohio State's if TCU and Ohio State were flipped last year, do you think Ohio State would have gotten in? I don't know.
That's a really good question. I think that that's a hard one. I don't know. You know what? I bet that Ohio State wouldn't have fallen as hard as TCU ended up falling, right? TCU ended up going from number 3 to number 6 in the course of, 3 weeks or something like that?
No, in just one week. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that Ohio State makes that.
And they had put up 60 something on Ohio State, on Iowa State, and blown them out. So, it's kind of when you if you think about it, the BCS, the idea of the BCS computer rankings wouldn't have taken that into account. Although the BCS did take into account the coaches poll, which is ridiculous. So can't say it wouldn't have been a factor there. But
well, what's interesting, so here's the other thing that's interesting about the BCS formula, and actually the college football Reddit, Twitter tweeted out what essentially the BCS rankings would have looked like had they still existed, and substituting in the AP poll for the Harris Interactive poll, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But so that was interesting. But ultimately, what was interesting about the BCS to the committee to me is that a big deal in BCS computer rankings was eliminating margin of victory from those rankings, right? So that was sort of a huge political deal in BCS rankings.
Yeah, I never liked that.
And okay, so here's my ultimate question, and I think part of the reason why there are issues with the college football rankings is because this question has not been answered, sort of unequivocally. Do you believe that the rankings should be representative of a team's resume to this point, or do you think that the rankings should represent what teams would be most likely to win in a playoff setting?
I think you're right. I'm not totally sure if that question has been answered, but my answer is, and I was actually about to bring this up, your resume solely up to this point. That's why a few weeks into the season, I had Northwestern in my top 4 because they had accomplished something. And you look at a lot of these teams in the top 10 who have not accomplished anything. Ohio State has not accomplished. I mean, not really accomplished anything. Baylor has not accomplished anything. TCU has not accomplished anything. MSU kind of has, but they kind of needed a miracle there to beat Michigan. So I kind of make that a wash. That's why I'm surprised to see a team like Memphis down at number 13. They beat Ole Miss and they're down a little bit. And Stanford has accomplished something. Stanford's blown out a number of pretty good teams. Notre Dame has accomplished something. My top four would have been Clemson, LSU, TCU, Notre Dame, and then Stanford at number 5. Just because I want teams that have accomplished something right now. And
so you would have left Ohio State out of the top 5 then.
Yes, I would have left Ohio State out. I would have left MSU out. I probably would have put Alabama probably at number 6.
Interesting.
Because they beat Texas A&M on the road.
So the reason I asked that question is because I think that sort of informs to a large degree what you do or do not make or take into account, right? So strength of schedule in either case is important, right? If you're trying to project who's going to be good in the future, strength of schedule matters. If you're trying to figure out what somebody has accomplished thus far, strength of schedule matters. So either way, strength of schedule is something that you should take into account, right? Yeah. If you're just looking at resume and what a team has done to this point and evaluating only to this point, how good a team has been and sort of what they've accomplished to this point, then margin of victory should probably not be a major factor unless you've got two teams with extremely similar resumes where, margin of victory might give you some amount of indication there, right? So
can margin of victory be part of that though? Why
Well, I'm just saying, margin of victory would be sort of a tiebreaker in that sense. It wouldn't be taken into account to the degree that simple wins and losses and who a team has beaten.
Sure, but I can't tell you how I would divide up the value of each thing category I look at, but I would include it in. That's part of the reason I listed TCU as number 3 because of some of those margins of victory. So then the flip side is, if you are trying to predict how good a team will perform in the future, then margin of victory is a much larger consideration, I think, right? So in that case, then yes, Baylor is probably, using margin of victory, Baylor is probably more likely to win games against hypothetical elite teams than MSU at this point. Simply because that Baylor team has had large margins of victory against poor opponents, whereas MSU has not been able to. Right. I'm not talking about in some sort of formula. I'm just talking about in how I look at it. And Baylor and TCU had a large margin of victory over West Virginia, which I find to be impressive. But I consider the margin of victory over West Virginia a lot more notable than I would the margin of victory over Lamar. That's what I was. So I mean, if you're doing it formulaically, it's different, and that's part of the reason why they didn't include it in the computer formula. But if I'm just subjectively looking at it from my own point of view, I do. So who would you have in your top 4 right now?
That's a good question. I think I would go Clemson, LSU. So essentially, to answer my own question, I would say at this point, what the ranking should be reflecting is current resume. So at that point, I would say Clemson, with their win over Notre Dame, has really accomplished something, and they're undefeated at this point. LSU, same thing, to be undefeated in the SEC at this point.
Beat Florida.
Yeah, and having beaten Florida is a big deal. At that point, then I would probably go with MSU. Honestly, the beating Michigan and beating at least a halfway decent slate of non-conference teams, I think would be impressive from that perspective. And then probably TCU would be there as well. As an undefeated team, they had a sort of close call against Texas Tech, but other than that, that margin of victory is sort of a tiebreaker. in some sense. But to me, the one-loss teams at this point would probably have to be left out just because, they're one-loss teams, right? And I think that as the rankings progress over the course of the season, that'll become a larger consideration, right?
I mean, when you're MSU and you're undefeated, you're 5-0 against winning teams, but they've all been very close or somewhat close. You open yourself up to like both praise and criticism, and you can make a case for MSU being a lot higher, but you can also make a case that they've gotten too close to calling some situations, which is why I think number 7 is there. So as we wrap up or talk about the playoff here, because I kind of want to get it into the actual football and whatnot, do you believe a undefeated MSU makes playoff?
An undefeated MSU? Absolutely.
Yes, me too. I had a couple people ask me that, and when people see 2 one-loss teams ahead of MSU, that question comes up. But again, it comes back to what I said. MSU's schedule is backloaded. You've got Penn State, who is, I think, bowl eligible, and Ohio State, obviously, and a Big Ten West champion, which will presumably be Iowa, while Notre Dame and Alabama have already kind of played a number of good teams. So that's part of the reason they go higher. I don't see any way an undefeated MSU would be left out. I don't think a one-loss MSU would be in. So it's kind of what I said at the beginning of the year, and it's kind of how I feel now.
Yeah, to wrap this up, the 538 projection system gave MSU a 22% chance of making the playoff overall and a 15% chance of winning the conference, which suggested sort of a 7% chance of making the playoff without winning the conference, which would require some pretty significant craziness elsewhere, but it is possible.
I mean, you'd have to have Iowa have lost beforehand before winning that. Well, I mean, would MSU have a better chance having lost to Ohio State and not played the Big Ten championship? No, they would probably have to beat Ohio State and then maybe lose to
I would think
one-loss Iowa or something like that.
Yeah, that would be my guess as well. I win over Ohio State, and then probably at that point, an Ohio State lost to Michigan as well. Plus, like a 1 or 2 loss Iowa coming into the Big Ten championship game, and then the Big 12 beats up on itself between Oklahoma State, Baylor, and TCU.
Yeah.
And then probably a 2-loss Pac-12 champion and no undefeated AAC team. Like I said, there's so many backloaded schedules. Clemson still has to play Florida State, LSU, Bama this weekend. November is going to be absolutely crazy. We've had a couple of pretty boring college football weekends in terms of slate because it's very true.
Because a lot of leagues backloaded their schedules. Big Ten partly did it because they don't have any high-profile crossover games. Arguably, the only decent profile crossover game is the one this weekend, and that's how we will segue into the talk about Nebraska. No, we're not going to talk about Nebraska. I forgot. No, we're talking about Indiana.
You just did. You gave yourself the Lee Corso not so fast, my friend.
Not so fast to myself. Okay, 52-26 final score week and a half ago. It was a 2-point game heading into the fourth quarter before MSU kind of blew the doors off in the end there. From what you remember about this game, what were your takeaways? I mean, was it an Indiana team that always, moves the ball on MSU, but Indiana just wore down, I think, at the end?
Yeah, so the biggest takeaway to me about this was pace element. So the idea there is just that this was the fastest game in terms of number of possessions that MSU has played all season. And so to me, it is not that surprising that the final margin was the largest of the season as well. So that to me was interesting. It seemed that MSU has kind of slow played itself into some margins of victory that are less impressive than they might seem if MSU was just really going after it and trying to score on some teams in the way that some of the Big 12 teams have been able to. But in any case, yeah, that to me was the biggest thing. Like over time, some of those games that are close, if you are able to just get enough possessions in, your advantage over the course of a game gets larger, right? So that was the biggest takeaway to me. Finally, that happened in the fourth quarter, and the defense really kind of settled in and shut down Indiana's offense there in the fourth quarter, right? So going into the fourth quarter, it was 28-26, I believe, and Indiana couldn't really do much of anything after that. So that was, between that and MSU scoring on all three of their possessions in the fourth quarter, it was nice to see. It was nice to see just kind of pulling away from a bad team. And I was more impressed by the defense than I sort of expected, right? So Indiana, with Nate Sudfeld at quarterback in 2013, came in and scored 28 on the 2013 Rose Bowl winning defense. So to hold them to what is essentially the exact same amount of scoring is pretty impressive.
It kind of played out like the last few games have played out, and where Connor Cook very much looks like a NFL quarterback, and the running game does not help him very much at all. And the defense has some good and bad moments. Cook goes 30 for 52, 398 yards, 4 TDs, no turnovers, like 2 yards away from tying the MSU record from Bill Burke against Michigan in 1999. And running-wise, LJ Scott, 6.2 yards per carry, which is pretty good. But Gerald Holmes was at 3.9. Delton Williams was at 0. They couldn't really run the ball, and it put them in a lot of third down situations. And I charted it out 2 weeks ago. Cook went 10 for 15 passing on third down, picking up 9 first downs in the air, and I think 2 more on the ground, something like that. So he was just absolutely unbelievable in the passing down situations. Now the problem is, they keep putting themselves in these passing down situations by getting themselves in third medium and third and long because they can't run the ball. And for the past few weeks, I've been saying they need to pass to set up the run. And, you finish the game with 44 technically rushing attempts, but they're not all rushing attempts, and 52 passes. I think that's kind of what you're going to have to get. You're going to have to pass more on first down to set up the run, set up runs on other first downs, because it's just the straight running game's just not working. When you can't run the ball in Indiana, then you've got problems. And Connor Cook has been playing so well the last 3 weeks, and so well when the other team knows he's passing, that I think you got to ride him here in these games, especially when you're going to a place like Nebraska this week. You're gonna have to rely on your senior quarterback to carry you, because he is the one carrying the offense the last few weeks. And defensively, I thought the defensive backs stepped up quite a bit. Guys were in, with how banged up they are and everything, and backups at basically every position. I thought it was a decent performance given the situation. What do you think about how the offense is running right now?
Well, that was interesting. There were a lot of people in my section in the stadium that were vehemently against running the ball on first down. I don't know. I think ultimately you're going to have to be able to run the ball with some consistency to be an efficient offense, right? And the way that the offensive line has been banged up over time, I think has really not helped this team in a variety of ways. I think it sort of dictated some of the slow play calling in the end of some games, especially the Purdue game, where with the offensive line injuries, they just wanted to make sure that Connor Cook didn't get hit a whole bunch. And so that's something. It is concerning that the running game was not able to do much against Indiana. My sort of sack adjusted numbers suggest that it was about 4.1 yards per rush, which is poor. So yeah, so that's a concern. I think ultimately that the type of passing game that MSU has adopted at this point is really low margin, right? So like against Michigan, but just in general, it seems like they throw these sort of back shoulder fade type throws pretty often, and that
Yeah, it's our
you
go-to.
know they can do that. It's something that they're able to do, but it's not a particularly reliable offensive strategy. So it's concerning, and I liked what I saw when they went play action on first down. They might have to do that a little bit more. The other thing that they don't do is run the ball in passing situations. So this has sort of been a hallmark of MSU offense for several years now, but
Yeah.
they don't run draws. They're sort of unable to run any screen passes effectively. I
Well,
haven't seen
they tried
pass
they
rush.
tried a few and they still don't work, and they haven't worked for 7 years, but they still try them a little bit.
So I don't know. I feel pretty
don't know.
confident
I don't know.
in Dave Warner's play calling, right? Like I could understand why some people would have an issue with some of his play calling this year, but considering the growth of this offense from where it was at the end of 2012 and at the beginning of 2013, I feel pretty confident that they'll be able to play call their way in a pretty decent fashion, right? Running the ball on first down, I think, has some value.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to me, Cook is so good when they know he's passing. You'd like to give him more opportunities where they don't know he's passing. And the Michigan game, they started off with a couple of play action passes. The first couple series or so, or sets of downs, which surprised me. It's good, but then they pretty much went run first down the rest of the way. But yeah, I don't know why the screen passes have never worked. I don't know if the quarterback telegraphs it. I don't know if the line telegraphs it. I don't know if the line doesn't get out there to block in time. I don't know if the running back can't run it right. But I can recall like 3 in 8 years under D'Antonio working. One of them was Larry Caper against Wisconsin in 2010. I think it was on a third down, and he picked up a huge gain to set up the winning touchdown. One was Le'Veon Bell against Notre Dame in 2010, where Manti Te'o just bounced off of him. And I don't even know if I would technically count that one as working because Le'Veon Bell just had it bounced the guy off of him. And the other one was Jeremy Langford had one in the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State. And whenever they get one, it sticks in my mind because it just never works. I don't know why it never works, but it just doesn't. And similarly, as they've kind of stopped running the Wildcat now, I think it's time to never run the screen passes again.
Oh well, but they ran the Wildcat in this game, and it was marginally effective. I mean, they picked up a couple first downs. To me, it seems like one of those things where they're just trying to put something weird on film so that they can come out with Terry in the Wildcat and then throw a pass to Connor Cook.
I was okay with it.
Ohio State game or something. I don't know.
I was okay with it because I don't think they were using it to set anything up. I think they were just using it to run the ball because handing the ball off wasn't working. And they just literally put him in and said, all right, we're doing a run play here. And what did he finish with? He finished with 8 yards on 4 carries. So it just kind of like they've used it enough where people know it's there. I don't think they're showing any more unless there's some different formations. But I was okay given the idea it wasn't to be tricky. It was to simply we can't run the ball, so this is how we're going to try to do it. So I at least understood that.
Yeah, and you avoid taking the hits on Connor Cook that way as well.
They did run quite a bit. They did do a couple of more designed runs with Cook than we've seen in quite some time. He was sacked. How many times? He was sacked 4. He was sacked 4 times behind a makeshift line. So that means he had 6 carries otherwise.
The other thing. So one last thing about this game is, and it's sort of slightly off topic here, but I don't know if you had anything else about Connor Cook running the ball. Any other points there you wanted to make? But
it's an option, and it's a good option to have on the shorts.
So special teams were good. I mean, they had a bad snap on the field goal attempt, but other than that, it was a very positive day for special teams. Average field position was hugely in MSU's favor. They had average field position at about their 36. A little some of that had to do with the quick interception that Grayson Miller got on the very first Indiana drive.
First play, yeah.
Yeah, the very first play. So that had something to do with it, and also the fact that MSU's offense is pretty efficient even on drives where they weren't scoring. They were still driving the ball a little bit, which helped flip field position to some degree, but there weren't a ton of gaffes.
Yeah, I mean, Kings had a 17-yard punt return, which I believe is their high of the year, and Shelton had a 58-yard kickoff return. So those are in Hartbarger. I think he shanked one, but he did have a 56-yard punt. He had a touchback and one inside the 20. Averaged 42 yards per 4 punts, which is better than they would get from their quarterback punting the ball. So that's an improvement there.
Yeah, Hartbarger's is still inconsistent, but I think that he's probably, he's going to give you a 56-yard punt, or he'll give you a 20-yard line drive punt. But I think at this point they kind of need to just stick with them, and I think he'll gain confidence.
It's going to be interesting to see who punts against Nebraska, because one of the reasons Antonio said he didn't use Hartbarger was because of the environment, and he didn't want the redshirt freshman out there panicking for, dropping a snap and having it returned for a touchdown or something like that.
We've never seen that happen, so yeah. I don't know why he'd be concerned about that. But.
So I guess I would assume Hartbarger's the guy, but I guess I also wouldn't be surprised if they have O'Connor, given the environment. So we'll see. And Geiger made a 21-yard field goal, which is good. And also Kevin Cronin had 4 touchbacks on 9 kickoffs.
Yeah, that was huge too.
Which was huge because they've been really not getting the ball deep enough there last.
And that's one of the least explainable issues on special teams so far this year, is that Cronin was great in 2014 at kicking the ball off, like nationally top 10, top 15 kickoff guy in terms of touchback percentage. And all of a sudden he can't get the ball to, inside the 5 even at times this year. So, and he's the same guy, I don't think, unless there's an injury that we haven't heard about or something along those lines. That I haven't had any good explanation for why Cronin has been so much worse this year than he was last year. But
it just seemed like everybody kind of took a step back for whatever reason, and that's not any sort of coaching. That's just, I don't know. But so Spartans are 8-0, and they head to Nebraska now. And this was a game at the beginning of the year. I wasn't high on Nebraska entering the year. You thought this was a huge, not trap game, but a huge test. As we head into the week, Nebraska's 3-6, coming off a loss to Purdue. Possible to miss a bowl in Mike Riley's first season. They've dealt with some injuries. Quarterback Tommy Armstrong did not play last week, and the backup had 5 turnovers against Purdue.
It was a great name, by the way, Riker Fife.
Yeah. Their top running back Terrell Newby is also up in the air, and by
that you mean he's questionable for the game. He's not literally hanging in space.
And Pearson L., their big special teams returner, is out for the year, and he returned a punt against MSU for a touchdown last year. And given how MSU has been covering kicks this year, that's probably the biggest news of all on the injury front. So they're a little bit banged up. MSU's banged up, but sounds like Jack Allen's good to go. So MSU's healing up a bit. So Joe, you were I guess afraid of this game at the beginning of the year. What are your feelings heading into it now?
Yeah, I'm still to some degree a little wary of this game for a couple reasons. I think the first thing is that Nebraska's record is not very representative of who they are as a team. They've lost a lot of really close games, and what about teams that lose many close games, like the 2012 MSU team, is that they're a lot better than the record indicates. So I know that they're 3-6. I know that they just gave up 55 points to Purdue, but at the same time, I feel like that's a program that's got a lot of pride in themselves, and traveling to Nebraska is never a particularly easy thing to do. That 2013 team 2 years ago got the first win against Nebraska that MSU has ever had. So yeah, I'm still a little wary. If you think back to 2010, an 8-0 MSU team went into Iowa City and got stomped by that Iowa team. That Iowa team was a lot better than this Nebraska team. That Iowa team was like a great team in the country at that point.
Yeah, we've seen this happen. We've seen a highly ranked MSU team go out west and lay an egg. They laid an egg against Nebraska in 2011 too on the road there.
Yep. So I'm still concerned, right? I mean, I think you still got two true freshmen playing safety, although my confidence in them is a lot higher than I would ever expect my confidence to be in two true freshmen playing safety. But, this MSU defense is not a vintage D'Antonio defense, and the offense can be inconsistent at times because of the inability to run the ball consistently and the low margin in the passing game to some degree. So, it's definitely encouraging that Nebraska gave up 55 points to Purdue last week, but at the same time, I think that they're gonna be playing hard, especially because they're gonna really be trying to get to bowl eligibility. Yeah. So
part of that with Purdue, I think Purdue had 4 touchdown drives of less than 25 yards because of all the turnovers. So that was part of why they put up 55, but still, it's Purdue, and it was not pretty last week. When I look at Tommy Armstrong, the biggest thing with him is his propensity to just chuck the deep ball, and that can be good and that can be bad. And against this MSU defense with its struggling defensive backfield, that might just be the recipe for Nebraska to just chuck it up there. Now they don't have a Kenny Bell, a wide receiver, like they used to bring them down. Their top receiver by far is Jordan Westerkamp, and the smaller, faster guy. So, obviously if they're missing him, it's a big get for MSU because Fife has 5 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Was just a mess last week. So
yeah, former walk-on. So yeah, I mean that's and the fact that those guys are potentially banged up, even if they do play, is a positive for MSU there. It's interesting that Darian Hicks wasn't on the depth chart, and
I didn't catch that. I was busy during the press conference. I didn't catch that. Did he ask about it, or anybody say anything about it?
Yeah, D'Antonio was asked about it, but he doesn't talk about injuries. So he made a joke about him not having the flu or something, but no, he's he won't play this week, and I think that that's a hit because although I don't know what would happen, even if Hicks was healthy, I don't know that they necessarily would transition Demetrius Cox back to safety or not. So
I think they would. I think the corner is if you have an able body in this defensive backfield who's not a freshman, or Monte Nicholson, I think you got to get him in because I also think he's your best defensive back. So I think they would, if he was good to go, I think they would have a spot for him. So I didn't catch that, but that's obviously a big loss because someone's going to have to guard Jordan Westerkamp, and I don't really know who it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see.
Oh, that's the other thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Interesting on that. The defensive backs, I really noticed this in the Indiana game. They're not physical like at all, and I don't know. It's a lack of trying. Like it's not. Cox, I was watching. Cox was eaten alive in the Indiana game until he made a couple big plays at the end. But he's sitting there right at the line of scrimmage, set up to press, and as the snap comes, he turns and he starts running alongside the receiver. Like there's not even an effort to bump. I don't know if they're being taught not to bump because they're not even trying. And if you're not trying, you shouldn't be sitting there at the line. You shouldn't be out there at the line of scrimmage. If you're just going to turn your back, move back a couple yards. Let the guy come to you. So because Cox was beaten on several short curl routes or back shoulder throws because he was just moving alongside a guy and he didn't try to rub him off his route or anything. And that's what MSU's cornerbacks were all about. Waynes and Denard and everybody getting up there and being physical and pushing off a guy. I don't know why they're like it's not even an effort. It's not even like doesn't look like it's in the thought process to play physical at all. I don't know if they're not good at playing physical, so they don't try, so you don't get tripped up and give up a big play. But if you're not gonna bump and you're gonna try to play safe, then back up those corners a little bit. I don't know. That was something that really just remember that stuck out about the Indiana game is how the corners were playing tight, but they weren't playing physical. So it was like, what's the point here? So
Yeah, they've been doing that for some time now, and I'm not sure exactly what the strategy there is. I'm not sure if it's, you know, the expectation is that MSU is going to play, tight man defense. So it's sort of enticing opponents to try and throw the ball deep. I don't know if that's sort of the strategy or what there, but yeah, I've noticed that too. It's been a little bit confusing. I don't know if it's just that sort of actual bump coverage is pretty difficult to execute to both bump and then also be able to stick with a guy. Yeah, it's I don't know exactly what's going on there.
yeah,
And I don't think what's been helpful so far this year is that they haven't really played against a quarterback that's been able to exploit that at all.
no, I mean
to any extent, really.
Sudfeld was able to a little bit, but they started to get some defensive line pressure on him, and the defensive backs did play a little bit better as the game went on, so that was part of it. But yeah, I mean, you don't imagine Riker Pfeiffer, Tommy Armstrong will be that guy, but if they decide to just start playing, 5,000 and throwing it up there, that'll be an interesting deal to see how the cornerbacks handle that.
Yeah, and to me the biggest thing, and they did a good job of this against Indiana, was just limiting the really explosive plays, right? Indiana's longest plays they didn't have any plays that were longer than 40 yards. And yeah, I think that's sort of going to be sort of the deal against Nebraska as well. If they can, make Nebraska take up, long drives, and Nebraska is going to make mistakes. So I think that the defensive strategy has been good. I think that they've done a good job of converting to a little bit of a bend but don't break, although they've broken a couple times against both Rutgers and Purdue. But I think that they've kind of come around to some degree in that sense as well. So yeah, this will be an interesting game from that perspective. And it's also just going to be interesting to see them play in another tough road environment. I mean, we already saw them go into Ann Arbor and do it, but it's a little different to travel all the way to Nebraska.
Part of me thinks they'll I mean, they've won 11 or 12 straight Big Ten road games, so part of me thinks the road game will help them a little bit because they seem to play better on the road than they do at home. But it'll be interesting also how much Connor Cook is used in the running game, the option game, because David Blau for Purdue had a 56-yard run. He broke off some runs against Nebraska, so it'll be interesting if they do that. So
or how much they end up using Damian Terry for Wildcat.
Yeah. So MSU is favored by only 5.5. I believe it opened at about 4.5. Might be closer than you expect when you look at the records, but MSU has played almost everybody close. So although they have covered in their last two games. So what's your score prediction for this one?
Considering that Purdue just put up 55, I think that MSU is going to be able to score a fair amount in this game. Let's go MSU 38, Nebraska 28.
I'll say MSU 35, Nebraska 21. So I guess we have them winning by more than Vegas does. So, anything else you wanted to touch on football before we wrap up with some basketball here?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, basketball starts on Wednesday. Exhibition against Northern. Izzo's talked the last couple of weeks about how things are setting up, and sounds like Bryn Forbes is going to be starting, which I called when last season ended, and a lot of people got upset about that. But and also looks like Javon Best probably going to start at the 4. When you look at the lineup, I mean, obviously it's a deep team with a ton of possibilities. They'll rotate guys in and out. Starting lineup may not be all that important. But what based on the comments over the last few weeks, what are you looking to see? What are you going to be looking for? Is that game on TV? Is that on BTN or is it on the BTN Plus deal?
So the game's on BTN Plus and it's on Spartan Sports Network. I actually went nuts and bought basketball season tickets this year, so I'll be there.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of driving, but but I think it'll be worth it. So as far as the lineup goes, I think that the Aaron Harris coming off the bench thing is going to be interesting because I think it's smart from the perspective that this MSU team, where the scoring is coming from, is basically Denzel Valentine and a Shohei Emoticon. Like I don't know,
Yeah.
who's going to end up using possession. So to have Aaron Harris on the second unit and have him be able to sort of create offense, I think is going to be useful. I think that Javon Bess is going to be helpful at the 4 in terms of sort of a secondary facilitator type role. I don't think that he's going to be able to create a whole lot of offense himself, but I think that he'll be the kind of guy who makes an extra pass and can space the floor to some degree. I think that when Marvin Clark comes back, and in full disclosure, I absolutely love Marvin Clark. I think Marvin Clark.
You're leading the bandwagon.
I think Marvin Clark will end up being the starting power forward just because I think that it makes the most sense from sort of a first and second unit perspective. I think that having Bess on the floor alongside Aaron Harris makes some sense in that Aaron Harris is a higher usage player. Javon Bess is sort of a smaller usage player, and I think Marvin Clark and his ability to stretch the floor and create some on his own will be helpful, given that sort of Tum Tum Nairn isn't going to do much of that, and neither is Bryn Forbes. So, yeah,
I think Forbes down the stretch last year provided a good amount of scoring in the postseason. The reason from like the day after whatever last season ended, I said, I think I forgot what I totally listed as my starting lineup, but I had Forbes in there. Forbes and Nairn and Valentine as the kind of backcourt. And I had a lot of people jump on me saying, no, Aaron Harris is going to be the guy. He's going to be a star. I said, well, hold up here. First of all, he hasn't played in games in a year, and Bryn Forbes was just a starter on a Final Four team. So that he's already got the experience and the chemistry needed with the team. 2, Aaron Harris's point total 2 years ago, West Virginia, was partially inflated because of his incredibly high usage. I mean, he took a lot of shots for West Virginia, so he's going to score a lot of points. And his offensive rating on KenPom, I believe, was less than what Forbes was last year, even though Forbes was just a 3-point specialist. So I'm not surprised Forbes starting from day one, because I said it months ago. That's why, at least to start the year, I thought Forbes had the edge because he was a starter on a Final Four team, and you can't underestimate, especially what that means to Izzo. Now, Aaron Harris could get there as the year goes on. I mean, very much so. But he hasn't played the game in more than a year. So there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of kind of questions. We know it's a deep team. We know it's a talented team. But, where's all that scoring going to come from? How are the rotations going to look? I think the fact that they played in Italy was good to start to kind of develop that. So it'll be interesting to see. Costello is now a senior. Can he get that senior year like Knicks or something like that and kind of become a guy in the post, because they don't have much scoring down there still. Costello's always kind of had the ability, but could never really consistently put it together. And Schilling took a big jump last year from his freshman to sophomore year, but he's still not a scorer down there. He's better at defense, and he's improved his defense and his rebounding, but he still can't score down there. And Bess is a bit undersized down there. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they attack things on offense.
Yeah, and I think what you'll end up seeing is that Bryn Forbes will start games, but and Tum Tum will as well. But I think that Aaron Harris will probably end up playing more minutes than those guys. Kind of Draymond a la 2010.
Yeah, I haven't seen practice. I know he's reportedly looked good, and Izzo said he's really good. But the fact that Forbes is ahead of him in the starting lineup at this point is not surprising, simply because of what happened last year. But Harris could very easily slide into that role based on how the beginning of the year goes.
Yeah, and so I mean that sort of feeds into my biggest question for the whole year is there's going to be Denzel Valentine using a lot of possessions and sort of being the focal point of the offense from nearly every perspective except low post scoring, which will probably be Costello, and I don't know how much Deonta Davis will be able to do that, but who's going to be sort of the secondary player? Because last year there was Travis Trice, who was sort of the main playmaker offensively, and then Valentine and Brandon Dawson were secondary offensive players. Who's going to be that secondary guy? Is it going to be Aaron Harris?
You had three guys. You had three guys you could go to try to score each possession. This guy has a chance. Tum didn't have a chance. Costello, Schilling didn't have. You had three guys though. You thought these guys can score. Outside of Valentine, you don't really know who else can score.
And then the other thing is who's going to absorb the rebounds that Dawson leaves behind, right? So Dawson was an absolutely terrific defensive rebounder and offensive rebounder for that matter. And so it's going to be really interesting to see who it is that is able to sort of pick up the slack in that sense, because for his career, Costello does not get as many rebounds as you might hope for.
No.
I think that he does a better job of boxing out than.
Yeah, but part of that too it was kind of with playing with Draymond. You got these guys, these power forwards who are so good at rebounding. It kind of takes away from the center. So that's part of it too. Part of not getting the rebounds is because Dawson was getting them or Draymond was getting them. So that's part of it. But Schilling got a lot better last year, but he needs to be he needs to take another step forward to be stronger and to get those defensive rebounds, because they were giving up offensive rebounds aplenty in the NCAA tournament last year, and that was remember we talked about that was costly at some points because they were giving away possessions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and maybe Javon Bess is that guy.
Maybe he in the limited time he played, he always made an impact, whether it was on the boards or scoring. He's gonna be really interesting to see here, because it sucked for him that he basically just wasted a year.
It's too bad that he couldn't have gotten a red shirt or something.
Right, but it seemed. But when he was in there, he always seemed to have a presence. So he's one I'm really interested to see. So if it's on BTN Plus though, I'm not gonna see it live at least.
Yeah. So how many of those questions will get answered tomorrow is probably none, but it will be interesting to sort of see how the rotations work, at least for the first couple minutes, and see how much Elvin Ellis ends up getting into the game, and also Deonta Davis, just to see him kind of play live, and all the other freshmen just to see them. McQuaid, it sounded like had a pretty good shot at breaking the rotation, just because if for no other reason he can really shoot the ball. He was also playing some point guard on the Italy trip, so it'll be interesting to see if he ends up sort of as a little bit of a point at times this season. And then Kyle Ahrens, I mean, we know almost nothing about as well. So yeah, just to see those guys and how much Kobe Wallenman might end up playing now that they're sort of a true third big with Deonta Davis. And it's a deep team. The way that the lineups will stagger will be really interesting. And yeah, I'm just excited to see live basketball tomorrow.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to write whenever that's done, whenever you get a chance, if you want to write it up, I think TOC readers would be like, you don't even need a game recap, just thoughts on each player or something like that, because obviously it's not going to matter. But
and probably relatively few people will see it because
right.
you actually have to pay extra money.
Right. I don't
BTN for BTN Plus.
Right, just put it on BTN to go. Like there's all sorts of football games that are only on ESPN3. Like just do that. We get BTN to go. Just like
right.
we pay to get BTN to go already in your package. So like just let us watch it on there. I don't. And I can't imagine they get that much money from BTN Plus.
And not only that, but they're going to show ads anyways, right? So
yeah.
Like it's always crazy. They've done that for like the last several years, and it's never made any sense to me because like invariably what ends up for sure happening is people pirating the feed, although I'm not going to endorse doing that. But I mean, I'm sure that that's what ends up happening anyway. So it just doesn't seem like a smart strategy from their perspective.
So, all right, we've been hit a lot of stuff. Apologies again for missing last week. Just had a ton of work stuff going on. Joe had a quarter life crisis and a birthday, so we plan on keeping doing this every week. Though after that, you can subscribe on iTunes. I believe RSS has been a little funky. Sometimes it's a day late, sometimes it's not. Still trying to figure that out. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Ternini. Joe's at JOBIN, number 2, letter E, and obviously at The Only Colors. So if you made it to the end here, appreciate it. And we will talk to you guys next week. See you.
See ya.